GTSC, 6 July 2023, the United States and China at the UN Security Council, the geopolitics of climate change. Aaron Sikorsky, the director of the Center for Climate and Security and the International Military Council on Climate and Security, outlines the geopolitical dynamics from a recent meeting of the UN Security Council and claims that taking effective action to address climate security risks would give the United States an advantage over China in their rivalry. The latest in a series of UNSC sessions on the subject, the UN Security Council, UNSC, convened an open ministerial-level discussion on climate change, peace, and security on June 13. The talk highlighted how today's competitive geopolitical dynamics make it difficult for sincere attempts to address climate security in such multilateral fora, even though many ministerial declarations concentrated on the relationship between climate change, instability, and conflict. China seems to view such conversations as geopolitical opportunities, particularly in its statements. Specifically, the United States and other global North nations have not complied with their obligations to deliver climate financing to the global South, particularly monies for adaptation. China utilized its time at the microphone during the conference to make several pointed remarks that were obliquely directed at the US, and the EU. Zhang Jun, China's permanent representative to the UN, proposed that the UNSC should concentrate its efforts in three areas. First, does unilateral withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, i.e., President Trump's policy in the U.S., constitute a threat to peace and security that the Council should address with enforcement measures given that emissions reductions are essential to limiting climate change and, consequently, limiting climate-driven security risks? Second, Ambassador Zhang emphasized the significance of climate finance and the discrepancy between promises and actual delivery. In his argument, he suggested that the UNSC could consider authorizing its field missions in those countries more severely impacted by climate change to collect information on the host country's annual receipts of climate finance from developed countries and to inform the Council regularly. Third, China criticized green protectionism, calling it a ball and chain that shackles developing countries and keeps them at the bottom of the global value chain. China referred to U.S. policies like the Inflation Reduction Act and the EU's new carbon border adjustment mechanism. Naturally, Beijing's statement is disingenuous because it downplays its emissions and predatory lending practices while focusing partly on former U.S. policies that are no longer in force. Since the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, came into being and nations committed to reducing emissions, China has become the world's greatest and leading cumulative emitter. Beijing has been abdicating its duty to cut emissions as quickly as the US or to provide climate funding to the most vulnerable nations in the global South for years by taking advantage of its status as a developing nation under the Paris Agreement framework. At the UNFCCC's 27th Conference of the Parties, COP27, in Egypt last November, Scott Moore and I saw that some nations had publicly questioned China's position for the first time. We stated, China received criticism for not doing enough to combat climate change. Other significant emitters of greenhouse gases, as well as further developing nations, also voiced their disapproval. The prominent Alliance of Small Island States Chair and Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, referred to China as a major polluter that could no longer expect a free pass on making contributions to climate finance. Despite this criticism, some global South nations may identify with China's perspective. Even countries like Ecuador, Egypt, Gabon, and Jordan supported the UNSC's role in addressing climate security during the meeting on June 13, putting the subject of climate finance and the necessity of fully fulfilling current commitments front and center in their speeches. For instance, the Ecuadorian envoy stated that developed countries must crystallize their commitments to mobilize $100 billion per year for developing states to address climate threats in conflict-affected states. For its part, the United States, represented by Special Envoy for Climate, SPEC, John Kerry, concentrated its remarks on the direct threats to human security posed by climate hazards and the need to reduce emissions, particularly criticizing nations, such as China, for allowing the construction of new coal plants at an unabated rate. Spec Kerry made a passing allusion to the need for trillions in climate finance and the adaptation-focused U.S. Prepare program. Still, he provided no specifics regarding any American attempts to increase adaptation funds or concentrate on financing for the Global South. This was a missed chance for the United States to respond forcefully to China's critical words. The United States enjoys a significant competitive advantage regarding climate security and adaptation. It has a history of more durable infrastructure investments abroad and more cooperative and democratic security cooperation compared to China. Overall, the ministerial meeting brought home the point that concerns about climate change are intricately entwined with geopolitical rivalry and cannot be viewed in isolation. China will likely try to use the finance issue to its advantage in the lead-up to COP28, which is expected to take place in the United Arab Emirates, UAE, later this year. At preparatory meetings in Bonn earlier this month, China joined India and Saudi Arabia, among others, in blocking an agenda item on mitigation unless a new climate finance agenda item was added. However, as demonstrated by China's difficulties at COP27, Beijing also has geopolitical vulnerabilities due to its involvement in the climate problem. As Beijing demands greater climate money but does not deliver major funds, the US has the chance to call China's bluff. In addition to addressing climate security issues, increasing American leadership in climate finance and adaptation will give Washington more leverage against China and show that it is committed to being the partner of choice for the Global South.